Hello everyone, this week I'd like to talk to you about power positioning. What's that and how is it different from normal positioning? And also what's positioning, you ask? Well, that sounds like a decent way to break down and discuss things to me. As a quick response to the first two questions, admittedly there's no real difference, but I like alliteration. And wanted a video title that stands out more. However, I believe the effectiveness of various positions for someone exists on a spectrum, and I'll be referring to someone's best and most effective position as their power position. And that's what I want to be able to help you guys find for yourself. The position that best empowers the way you like to use your weapon. But overall, the theme of today is positioning, so now let's go over that last question and talk basic positioning. Positioning is a combination of how and where you place yourself on the map. Good positioning will really accent the strengths of your weapon and mitigate any weaknesses and hopefully force your opponents to deal with you at your best. Oftentimes, the cases where I hear the most about positioning is when it comes to long-range weapons and in particular snipers. Like, oh, Day of Deep Blues is a good sniper because he has a good idea of where to place himself and when he needs to reposition. Stuff like that. But I rarely hear positioning applied to short-range slayers. We all love watching Set to Destroy X's Kiver do what he does, but good aim and movement is usually what's talked about, when in fact, being able to hit your enemies while dodging their attacks very much counts as good positioning as well. Now I highly doubt it's a case of people not taking positioning into account for shorter ranges as much as longer ones, at least I certainly hope not. But for those of you who maybe don't put in as much consideration on the shorter end, allow me to enlighten you. Now, part of that difference in underappreciation might be due to the fact it's a lot simpler to imagine positioning in terms of long range. If I'm standing in a spot where I can reach my opponent and my opponent can't reach me, that sounds like a pretty good position, right? Easy. But make no mistake, every weapon of every amount of range needs to be conscious of position. What do you do when you're short range and possibly outranged by every weapon on the opposing team? Well, of course you need to be able to get yourself in a position to try and bridge the gap so that you can get with them within your range as well. Sometimes achieved with stealth and a good flank, and other times you have to get your hands a little more dirty to try and get on equal footing. Safety is something that you also need to consider. If you're taking too much damage to try and reach a neutral position just so that you have a chance to hit your opponent as well, we can hardly acknowledge that as an actual neutral, since you're now in a weakened state leaving your opponent with the upper hand, aka rushing down your opponent when they're clearly ready for you. Granted, sometimes you can force a trade, and that may even be making the best of a situation you're in at the time, but that's not the ideal outcome you should be looking for if it doesn't have to be. There's not much of a point in trying to get to a good position if it's just going to get you splatted trying to get there. You'll have to respect the fact that your opponent might be in a better position than you and try to find a different approach to then reach a better position than them. Oftentimes, there's more than one way to do something, so no need to overcommit to a tactic that probably won't work out for you. And remember, it's a team game, so maybe bring a friend, and together you then might have enough firepower to overthrow the problematic enemy position. So now that we've glossed over some basic positioning, we can have a little more fun and talk positioning. Thanks, Terry. Each map has some popular key locations, such as the center of the map, high ground, and sometimes they're one and the same. And whichever team holds possession of those spots usually has some type of advantage. The stage and mode objective usually dictates what areas will be most important as well. Splat zones makes a pretty obvious example, as having control of a certain area is the mechanic of the mode, and is very well indicated with its vibrant visuals. Let's start with taking a look at splat zones on Blackbelly Skate Park. For other modes on Blackbelly, having control of the center isn't as important to me, as the goals for tower control, Rainmaker, and Clamblitz are located elsewhere on the map. But for splat zones, that's top priority for me, so I want to get there quickly. From here, I can paint both zones, which is my main win condition. I can hold my own ground on top, as anyone who directly tries to remove me from this position is within lethal range of roller flicks, and I have a wall to protect from distant attacks. I can pressure other areas so my opponents can't easily take the zones from me. To support my teammates, I can also use my wall, and I have my longer range vertical flicks. And everything I've already mentioned is even further enhanced with my Splat Bomb Launcher special. These are my win conditions for this particular map and mode combination. There's no doubt other weapons would be able to do a decent job at helping me achieve my conditions as well. But this weapon in this spot easiest allows me to fulfill the largest amount of my conditions, with my desired playstyle. The amount of AoE or area I can affect is greatest from this one spot, and a lot of it is relevant, which is an important aspect of determining how good a position is. I can still do the same exact thing for other modes, but they have way less of an impact in actually winning the game. which changes how powerful the position is to fulfill my win conditions. I would like to reiterate on the word relevancy and its relation to positioning. The other modes that I have been mentioning are way more dynamic in terms of locations compared to Splat zones. The tower follows along a track that spans across the map, and the Rainmaker and Super Clams can move anywhere, so good positions need to be adopted accordingly to wherever those objectives move. Being in the right place at the right time is the name of the game. I want to give a quick shout out to the in-game map recon, because I find it's a good tool to help you imagine where you want to position yourself, and you can learn the extent of what you can do in certain places. I highly recommend practicing with it if you ever get bored with the training area. You might be surprised at what you find you can do, especially when a new map comes out. How about we finally get into some breakdown examples of some power positioning. Here you can see the opposing team is pushing back towards the middle of the map. I can't see much from my current position, so I seek out some higher ground to better utilize my range. A more powerful position, if you will. Snipers are a pretty natural predator for Splatlings, but I really want to make sure the enemy can't push up further on our side, so I try my best to hold my position and not lose ground. I finally remember my splash wall to try and help give me a leg to stand on. Once the Stingray comes out, I finally give up on that position. Fortunately, I chose a great time to reposition as the enemy uses a baller and their push begins in full force. It was still far enough away that I'm easily able to counter it with a splash wall as it covers the one narrow path. I had a feeling they felt pretty dejected on their frontal attempt and might try to sneak in through a different path. And since you can see exactly where the Super Clam is, it was easy to confirm, and my little head start on repositioning let me set up confidently. With the opponent having to come to us, my range, and knowing where to position it, I was able to set up a solid defense. Now what if I told you that a very thin line divides the rules of offense and defense, and it merely comes down to the intent of your positioning? And what I mean by that is, I can do the exact same thing I just did on my side of the map, just as easily on their side. Think back to what I just said moments ago. With the enemy having to come to us, my range, and knowing where to position it, I was able to set up a solid defense. Changing that one word of defense to offense can still make it a valid statement. What I've described is basically the rationale behind the ancient position known as the spawn camp, making yourself at home on the enemy's side of the map. And I think a very wise person said it best when they said,
"All your base are belong to us."
It's usually something you see shorter range weapons doing, because they don't need as much of an advantageous position, and their quicker fire rates let them deal with a higher frequency of enemies. But given the proper position, long-range weapons can find just as good of success, and sometimes even more so, as you can reach them, but they can't reach you. And that sounds like a pretty good position. Spawn camping is certainly a powerful position to be in when done well, and of course it's more suited to shorter ranges, but the methodology behind it can still be applied to other places for long ranges, and I think a good example is in front of objectives, like a Rainmaker or a tower. Longer ranges can get away with playing from behind easier, but that may not always be the most optimal position and may make it harder for your presence to be felt. And I'm not saying long range should be frontlining leading the charge, but if your teammates are attacking, a good relevant position would be up there supporting their attack as well. So to summarize, where you're positioned can have a big impact on the strength of your weapon, and a good position will empower your weapon. You can very much treat locations like an extension of yourself, so you can view them as one of your weapons as well. You can almost even look at certain places on a map like a tier list. They usually play off of each other, and certain spots will have an advantage over others. Looking at you, Rainmaker and Starfish Mainstage, that particular spot is... well, I'm not going to get into that right now. Don't forget, relevancy is also an important part of positioning. A location may be useful at one point, but if action is taking place elsewhere, don't be afraid to leave your comfort zone, as there's probably somewhere else more useful you should be. Know when not to overstay your welcome, and that goes double for when you're on offense. Have a backup plan for other positions you can fall back to. And speaking of offense, be confident enough to play a good offense as you would a defense, and vice versa. If you can do one, you can do the other, so don't let the illusion of proximity deter you. Hopefully I've now empowered you to think more about if what you're expecting to get out of a situation matches up with where you're placed. But this episode is over, Anakin, and I have the high ground. This has been the Gingerbread Man, and you can catch me in the next episode. Thanks for watching.
I get knocked